The cold void of space wasn't supposed to feel this suffocating. But right now, it did. The Kevlani Armada, a ruthless alien empire spanning hundreds of worlds, had finally made their move. Humanity had been a thorn in their side for decades, resisting every diplomatic strong-arm, every technological embargo, and even surviving their covert sabotage attempts. But this time, they weren't playing games. They had come in force. A fleet of 30 war-class dreadnoughts loomed just outside Juno 3, one of Earth's most crucial deep space colonies. 100,000 souls lived here. Miners, scientists, families. And now, they were surrounded. Inside the colony's command bunker, Admiral Vasquez stood over the holographic display, her eyes scanning the fleet formations with the calculating gaze of a predator rather than prey. A group of officers murmured around her, their nerves evident. "This isn't a blockade," said Commander Rourke, his voice tense. "This is a chokehold. They're not here to negotiate. They're here to end us." Vasquez didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to Dr. Hayes, the lead scientist in Juno 3's Defense Division. "Can we activate the cage?" Hayes hesitated. "It's untested. If it fails, we die anyway," Vasquez cut in. "Do it." The cage was a theoretical countermeasure, a desperate attempt at turning human ingenuity into a last-ditch defense mechanism. The Kevlani had superior firepower, but humans adapted. As Hayes rushed to implement the activation sequence, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the bunker's speakers. "Humans of Juno 3, you are hereby subjects of the Kevlani Dominion. Surrender, and your deaths will be painless. Resist, and we will erase your existence from the stars." The voice belonged to Grand Warlord Tarvok, the Butcher of the Serath Nebula, a warlord who had personally overseen the extermination of entire planetary civilizations. Vasquez smirked. She tapped a command into the console, activating the colony's wide-range communicator. "Tarvok, you really don't know humans, do you?" she said, her voice cool and composed. There was a brief silence before a response came, this time laced with amusement. "Your courage is wasted, Admiral. Your species is overmatched, outgunned, and cornered. You cannot win." Vasquez's smirk deepened. "Oh, we know. That's why we're not playing to win." She pressed a button, and the cage activated. Juno 3's entire planetary grid hummed to life, sending a massive electromagnetic pulse rippling outward. Not just a standard EMP, but a specialized gravitic distortion pulse designed to interfere with the Kevlani's phase drives. Tarvok's fleet suddenly lurched in space. The graceful, predatory movement of their ships came to an abrupt halt. Panic crackled through their communication channels as their navigation systems short-circuited. Vasquez turned to Rourke. "Now, we flip the script." "Roger that," Rourke said, barking orders to the gunnery officers. Juno 3's defenses were nothing compared to a Kevlani war fleet, but the colony had one thing the enemy never considered: a fleet of civilian ships rigged for war. Cargo haulers, mining vessels, even personal transporters. Every last one of them had been secretly modified with weapons, armor, and countermeasures. This wasn't just a colony, it was a trap. The first volley of missiles launched from Juno 3's surface, targeting the dreadnought's now vulnerable hulls. The Kevlani were used to overwhelming their enemies. They had never been put on the defensive before. Explosions rippled across the enemy fleet, smaller ships breaking apart as their shields collapsed. The Kevlani scrambled to adjust, but without their phase drives, they couldn't maneuver out of the colony's range. Tarvok's voice returned, now furious. "You insolent filth! You dare—" "Oh, we do more than dare!" Vasquez cut him off. "We prepare!" The colony's hidden boarding parties launched next, small, fast-moving vessels packed with Special Forces operatives trained in counter-Kevlani warfare. They latched onto the enemy ships like leeches, cutting into their hulls and unleashing trained human soldiers into their corridors. The battle was chaos. Tarvok hadn't just underestimated human tactics. He had underestimated our sheer refusal to die quietly. The Kevlani thought they had trapped humanity. They had no idea they had just walked into the biggest mistake of their lives. The Kevlani dreadnought Sovereign Wrath burned in the void, its sleek black hull scarred by unexpected damage. Fires raged in the corridors, alarms blaring in a language that, until now, had never known panic. Human boarding teams moved like ghosts through the wreckage, their weapons sharp, their purpose sharper. Tarvok stood at the center of his warship's command deck, claws digging into the armrest of his throne. His yellow eyes burned with rage as he watched his fleet struggle, their formations broken, their superiority meaningless in the chaos humanity had unleashed. "Status," he barked. His second-in-command, Vorkal, bared his fangs in frustration. "The human pulse disrupted our phase drives. Our dreadnoughts are trapped in normal space until we can recalibrate. The enemy is using improvised vessels to attack weak points in our hulls. It is unconventional," Tarvok snarled. That word, unconventional, it was the only true advantage humanity had ever had. They were weaker, slower, less advanced, but time and time again they refused to fight properly. They never accepted they had already lost, and that made them dangerous. "Redirect all firepower to the colony's surface," he ordered. "If we cannot break free, we will burn them alive." The gun crews obeyed. The Sovereign Wrath's primary cannon turned toward Juno 3, its massive energy core charging. But then, something unexpected happened. The cannon shut down. Tarvok's eyes widened. "What?" A deep chuckle echoed through the bridge's speakers. A human voice, smug, confident, and infuriatingly calm. "Hey there, Tarvok. Having a rough day?" Tarvok's claws scraped against his throne, his body stiffening. "Who is this?" "Just a guy who doesn't like bullies." Tarvok didn't understand what was happening until he glanced at the tactical display. The humans had done something unthinkable. A small group of boarding shuttles had latched onto Sovereign Wrath's engineering bay, and in the chaos of battle, his security teams had been too overwhelmed to stop them. Now, humans were inside his ship, inside his control systems. Tarvok slammed a fist onto the control panel. "Seal off engineering. Flush them into space." "Yeah, about that," the human voice returned. "We've already overridden the locks. Also, did you know that if you reroute power from life support to weapons, there's a teeny-tiny risk of a total core meltdown?" Tarvok's stomach dropped. "You wouldn't dare," he growled. "Try me," the voice said. And then the lights flickered. Sovereign Wrath's primary cannon shut down completely. The weapons grid followed. Deck by deck, the entire ship was being hijacked. Tarvok had always assumed humanity was reckless, that they threw themselves into battle because they had no strategy. But this wasn't recklessness. This was surgical, brutal, and methodical warfare. Down in the engineering bay, Lieutenant Sarah Connors wiped a streak of oil from her cheek, grinning at the panicked alien crew members around her. The Kevlani were taller, stronger, and better equipped. But right now, none of that mattered. Because humans cheated. Sarah adjusted her comms. "Command, we've got control of their primary power grid, awaiting orders." Admiral Vasquez's voice came through, crisp and ruthless. "Tarvok thinks we're desperate. Let's remind him who the real predators are." Sarah smirked. The Sovereign Wrath, once the most feared ship in the Kevlani fleet, was now under human control, and the real fight had just begun. Tarvok's fists clenched so tightly, his claws nearly punctured his own palm. His warship, the pride of the Kevlani Dominion, was now a crippled beast, its weapons silenced, its power grid in enemy hands. And worst of all, it had taken only minutes for the humans to do it. The bridge was in chaos. Officers barked overloading systems reports. Security feeds flashed with scenes of Kevlani warriors being cut down, and warning klaxons howled like dying animals. The impossible was happening. The prey had become the predator. Tarvok rose from his command throne, towering over his subordinates. "Enough!" His voice was a snarl of pure fury. "Prepare for manual override. I want full control back now!" Vorkal, his second-in-command, hesitated, his claws flexed in unease. "Supreme Warlord, the humans have compromised our reactor failsafes. If we attempt a system reboot..." Tarvok grabbed Vorkal by the throat and lifted him off the ground with ease. The bridge fell silent. "Do you think I fear these creatures?" Tarvok growled, his yellow eyes burning with hatred. "I have exterminated species that dared defy us. I have bathed in the blood of those who thought they were clever." Vorkal gurgled, struggling against his grip. "I will not be humiliated by them." Tarvok dropped Vorkal to the floor. The officer gasped, rubbing his bruised throat. "Find a way to purge them from my ship," Tarvok ordered, "or I will purge you." But even as he issued the command, he knew. This was different. Humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. Admiral Vasquez stood with arms folded, eyes locked on the tactical display. The situation was shifting faster than even she had expected. The Kevlani fleet, once an overwhelming force, was crippled, its ships unable to maneuver, its flagship now under human control. Status report on the boarding teams. "Alpha Team controls engineering," Commander Rourke replied. "Bravo is pushing towards the bridge. Resistance is heavy, but the Kevlani are fighting like cornered animals." Vasquez nodded. That was expected. The Kevlani were warriors, genetically engineered for domination, raised from birth to believe they were superior. But they weren't used to losing. And that was exactly why humanity was about to destroy them. She activated her comms. "Lieutenant Connors, do you have control of their reactor systems?" A crackle, then Sarah's voice came through, grinning even over comms. "Oh, we've got more than that. Their ship is basically ours now. We can shut them down, or blow them up." Vasquez smiled. "Let's not waste the opportunity. Push forward. The bridge is the priority." "Roger that. We'll make it quick." Vasquez turned back to Rourke. "How are our own losses?" He hesitated. "Heavier than we'd like, but acceptable." Vasquez exhaled. Every casualty stung. But this was a war they couldn't afford to lose. Because the Kevlani? They wouldn't have hesitated to slaughter every last human on Juno 3. And now, they were paying for that arrogance. Sarah Connors ducked behind a half-melted bulkhead, her pulse rifle smoking as she dropped another Kevlani warrior. Their bodies were thicker, stronger, their reflexes faster. But humans? Humans had adaptation. And right now, Sarah and her team were adapting the hell out of this fight. "Move! We're 3 hulls from the bridge!" she barked. The Marines pushed forward, clearing rooms with brutal efficiency. Kevlani officers tried to rally, but their coordination was falling apart. They weren't used to this kind of relentless aggression. One of the aliens roared, lunging at Sarah with a plasma-forged blade the size of her leg. She sidestepped, slammed the butt of her rifle into its jaw, then jammed a shock blade into the gap in its armor. The Kevlani collapsed, convulsing as electricity fried its nervous system. "That's for Earth, asshole," Sarah muttered. A burst of static hit her comms. "Lieutenant, we're getting reports that the Kevlani fleet is trying to regain control of their phase drives," Sarah cursed. "If they managed to escape, they'd bring reinforcements. They had to end this. Now she turned to her squad. "We need to take the bridge. No holding back." Her Marines grinned. They knew what she meant. This wasn't just an infiltration mission anymore. This was an execution. Tarvok braced himself against the command throne, eyes darting between his failing tactical screens. The humans were coming. A deep, primal part of him, a part he had never acknowledged, felt something he had never felt before. Not anger, not hatred, fear. Because for the first time in his life, Tarvok was realizing something terrifying. Humans didn't fight like warriors. They fought like monsters. And they weren't here to win. They were here to break him. The Sovereign Wrath's bridge was a battlefield, the last stronghold of a dying empire. Tarvok stood tall, his claws slick with blood, both human and Kevlani. His elite honor guard fought beside him, their roars shaking the walls as they clashed with the relentless, merciless invaders. But the humans? They weren't slowing down. They moved with a ferocity that defied logic, their tactics brutal, their weapons efficient. They had lost many, but every fallen Marine only seemed to make the others fight harder. Tarvok gritted his teeth, deflecting a human's shock blade with his wrist guard before slamming a fist into their skull. The soldier crumpled, but two more took their place. They never stopped. And then, the doors at the rear of the bridge blew open. Sarah Connors stepped through the smoke, pulse rifle raised, her eyes locked onto Tarvok. Her armor was scorched, blood smeared across her face, some hers, some not. But her expression? Calm, controlled, like she already knew how this was going to end. Tarvok felt his warriors hesitate. They could feel it too, the shift, the inevitability. Humanity had already won. Sarah's team had fought tooth and nail to reach the bridge. The Kevlani fought like cornered beasts, their desperation making them even more dangerous. But humans knew how to weaponize desperation. Sarah had one goal: cut off the enemy's escape. Juno 3 had already crippled the Kevlani's phase drives, but that wouldn't last forever. If Tarvok's forces escaped, they'd regroup, come back stronger. They needed to finish this. Her comms crackled. "Connors, Vasquez here. We've intercepted enemy transmissions. They're calling for reinforcements from the Dominion's core fleets. If they get through..." "They won't," Sarah cut in. She looked at her team. Every single one of them was battered, exhausted, wounded, but they weren't broken, and they wouldn't stop. "One last push," Sarah said. "We take the bridge. We end this war." Her Marines didn't need orders. They just nodded and charged. Tarvok locked eyes with Sarah. For the first time in his life, he understood something he had never considered before. Humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting because they enjoyed tearing apart their enemies. A sickening realization crept up his spine. Had he been wrong? Had his people, his entire empire, miscalculated the nature of humanity? They had thought of humans as weak, undisciplined savages. But looking into Sarah Connor's cold, predatory gaze, Tarvok saw the truth. They were the monsters. And the Kevlani? They were just another species doomed to extinction. Sarah tilted her head. "What's the matter, Warlord?" she asked, stepping forward. "Not used to being on the other end of an execution?" Tarvok snarled, lunging forward. Bang! Sarah's pulse rifle fired once, a single clean shot to the knee. Tarvok collapsed, roaring in pain. His warriors staggered, their confidence shattered. Sarah moved in, pressing her rifle under his jaw. "Surrender," she ordered, "or we burn the rest of your fleet out of the sky." Tarvok breathed heavily, his massive frame trembling. For the first time in his life, he had no options left. Tarvok had never felt this before. Not on the battlefields of Vorkesh, where he had personally crushed the last resistance of the Zalorans. Not during the culling of Theta Prime, when his fleet burned an entire world to ash. Not even when he had stood before the Kevlani High Dominion, earning the title of Supreme Warlord. This was different. This was defeat. Sarah Connors stood over him, her pulse rifle firmly pressed under his jaw, finger hovering over the trigger. Around them, the bridge was silent. The battle had ended in minutes once their leader fell. His warriors, his once mighty warriors, stood motionless, weapons lowered, their bodies tense with uncertainty. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Humans were supposed to beg. They were supposed to break. They were supposed to die screaming. And yet here he was, on his knees. Sarah tilted her head slightly, studying him like a scientist examining an insect. "You know," she said, voice casual, almost conversational, "we could kill every last one of you. Right now. No negotiations. No mercy." Tarvok's mandibles twitched in anger, but he said nothing. Because she was right. The entire fleet was compromised. Their dreadnoughts, their strike craft, their superior technology, all of it meant nothing when humans didn't play by the rules. Sarah's grip on her rifle didn't waver. "But I want you to understand something." She leaned in close, voice dropping into a quiet, deadly whisper. "We don't just want to win. We want you to suffer forever thinking you could beat us." Tarvok's yellow eyes widened. That was the difference. Other species fought for dominance. Other species fought for survival. But humans, they fought to make sure you never tried again. Tarvok's breathing was ragged. He forced himself to meet her gaze, his pride screaming at him to fight, to lash out, to die like a warrior. But that's what they wanted. That's what she wanted. If he died now, his species was over. If he fought back, they would wipe out the entire Kevlani fleet, and the High Dominion would never recover. Tarvok closed his eyes. His fists clenched so tightly his claws drew blood. And then, slowly, he lowered his head. Surrender. A sound of shock rippled through his remaining warriors. A Supreme Warlord had never surrendered in battle. Sarah pulled back, lowering her rifle just a fraction. She tapped her comms. "Vasquez, it's done." A pause. Then the Admiral's voice came through, sharp and satisfied. "Good. Secure the bridge. We take full control of their fleet." Sarah smirked. She turned back to Tarvok. "Congratulations, Supreme Warlord." She gestured at the battlefield. "Your people get to live, but make no mistake." She knelt down, lowering her voice to a whisper again. "If any of your kind ever think about trying this again, we won't just destroy your fleet. We'll come for your homeworld, and we'll turn the Kevlani race into nothing but a bad memory." Tarvok swallowed hard, his pride burning inside him. This wasn't just a loss. This was annihilation, delayed only by human amusement. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sarah stood up and turned to her Marines. "Lock them down and prep the fleet for full occupation." The war wasn't just over. It had never been a war to begin with. Just another species learning the hard way. You don't trap humanity. Humanity traps you. The bridge of the sovereign wrath was eerily silent now. Human soldiers moved with calculated precision, securing every Kevlani officer, confiscating weapons, and locking down the last remnants of resistance. The once mighty warriors of the Dominion stood motionless, their heads low, their claws twitching, but useless. They had never known defeat like this, because no species had ever done this to them before. Sarah Connors stood near the Central Command throne, watching as her Marines methodically dismantled the enemy's last defenses. A Kevlani admiral, one of Tarvok's top officers, tried to lunge for a hidden blade, but a Marine smashed a rifle butt into his face before he could even grip the handle. Pathetic. Sarah tapped her comms. Bridge secured, awaiting final orders. Vasquez's voice came through, crisp and controlled. Good work, Connors. Juno 3 has full fire control over the Kevlani fleet. We're preparing for the next phase. Sarah's smirk faded. Next phase. She knew what that meant. The war wasn't just about winning. It was about making sure no one ever tried this again. She turned to the once proud warlord, still on his knees, still silent. Tarvok. He didn't look up. Your people just became ours. A ripple of anger flashed through his body, but he didn't move. Because he knew. The Kevlani had no more options. The Dominion had sent its best fleet, its strongest warships, and they had been reduced to wreckage in mere hours. Now, humanity had control of their technology, their strategies, their weaknesses. And worst of all, they had control of him. Sarah crouched in front of him, her voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, Supreme Warlord, what do you think happens next? Tarvok's breathing was shallow, his mind racing. Surrender meant enslavement. Resistance meant genocide. Escape was impossible. He had never faced a species that refused to leave an enemy intact. Other empires had defeated their foes and taken tribute. Humans didn't take tribute. They took everything. Sarah's eyes were cold, calculating. I'll tell you what happens next, she continued. You give the order to your fleet. Every remaining Kevlani vessel lowers their shields, surrenders control, hands over every single Dominion secret we can use. Tarvok gritted his teeth. And if I refuse? Sarah's smile was cruel. Then we test the limits of how long it takes to erase your species. You would commit genocide? Tarvok hissed, a flicker of old pride rising. Sarah let out a soft laugh. You think you're special? You think we haven't done it before? Tarvok's stomach dropped. That was the moment he understood. Humanity didn't fight wars like the Kevlani. They fought wars like apex predators. They wiped out competition. They broke enemies so thoroughly that they would never rise again. The Kevlani had assumed that human mercy was weakness. They had been wrong. It was a choice. A gift humanity only gave if they saw a reason to. And right now? Sarah was looking at Tarvok as if she were deciding whether or not his species deserved to exist. He exhaled slowly. His pride screamed at him to fight, to resist, to die like a warrior. But his duty whispered something else. Survival. Survival at any cost. Tarvok lifted his head. His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. I will give the order. A pulse of triumph flickered across Sarah's expression. She tapped her comms. Vasquez, it's done. The Supreme Warlord is ready to comply. A pause. Then the Admiral's voice. Well done, Lieutenant. Secure the surrender. Then bring him to me. Sarah stood up, tilting her head slightly. You made the right choice. But the way she said it? Tarvok wasn't sure if she meant it as a mercy or a warning. Because one thing was very, very clear now. Humanity had been underestimated. And now? The Kevlani would never make that mistake again. The official surrender of the Kevlani fleet was broadcast across every surviving warship. Tarvok's voice, once filled with unshakable pride, now carried the weight of submission. His orders were clear. Lower shields, deactivate weapons, and hand over command to the humans. And as the Kevlani Dominion's once mighty armada submitted, one brutal, undeniable truth became clear to everyone. The war was over. Not just this battle, not just this campaign, the entire war. And humanity had won. Admiral Vasquez stood with her arms crossed, watching the fleet fall in line. The once glorious dreadnoughts of the Kevlani Empire were now prizes of war, their fearsome war engines reduced to idle husks. And every single one of them? Now under human control. Vasquez exhaled, turning to Commander Rourke. "Confirm all Kevlani vessels are secured." Rourke nodded. "Aye, Admiral. The fleet has surrendered completely. Some minor resistance, but nothing we can't handle." Vasquez smirked. "Good. And the Supreme Warlord?" Rourke hesitated. "Still on board the Sovereign Wrath. Lieutenant Connors is bringing him in now." Vasquez glanced at the holographic displays one last time before giving a short nod. "Prepare the War Council. It's time to decide what happens next." Sarah Connors walked through the dimly lit corridors, Tarvok in tow. His hands were bound in military-grade restraints, his once majestic armor now scarred and stained from battle. His steps were heavy, his posture slumped, not from injury, but from defeat. Human Marines flanked him on either side, rifles at the ready. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a symbol. Sarah didn't bother speaking as they walked, because she didn't need to. The silence was worse than any words. They passed by Kevlani prisoners, warriors who had once been the terror of the galaxy, now reduced to hollow-eyed captives. One of them spat at the floor as Tarvok passed, a sign of disgust, of betrayal. Even his own kind saw him as a failure now. Tarvok didn't react, not because he didn't care, but because, deep down, he agreed. He had spent his entire life believing in the unbreakable supremacy of the Kevlani Empire. But now he was being marched through his own warship like cattle. The humans had stripped away everything, his fleet, his honor, his very purpose. And worst of all, they hadn't done it with brute force. They had done it with strategy, with patience, with terrifying precision. The humans had played the long game, and he had never seen it coming. Sarah led him into the holding cell. It was cold, metallic, impersonal, fitting. She gestured to the Marines. "Lock him down. Maximum security." The soldiers shoved Tarvok inside, securing the restraints. He didn't resist. Sarah studied him for a moment before speaking. "Do you understand now?" Tarvok exhaled slowly. "Understand what?" Sarah leaned in. That this was never a war. Tarvok's mandibles twitched slightly. "You expect me to believe this was anything else?" Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You thought you were fighting for conquest. We were fighting for survival." She tilted her head. "And the thing about humans?" She lowered her voice. "When we fight for survival, we don't stop until we own everything." Tarvok's breathing hitched, because he believed her. The war was over, but somehow he knew humanity was just getting started. Tarvok sat motionless in the cold, metallic cell, staring at the floor. The weight of his defeat pressed against him like a crushing gravity, heavier than any battle wound he had ever endured. He was supposed to die with glory. He was supposed to take humanity's world and burn it to ash. He was supposed to stand victorious, his name written into history as the warlord who broke an upstart species beneath his heel. Instead, he was here. A prisoner. A cautionary tale. A failure. The worst part? The humans hadn't even truly fought him. They had outthought him. They had outmaneuvered him. They had let him believe he was winning, all while tightening the noose. He had walked right into their trap, and now his entire empire would suffer for it. The door to the holding cell hissed open. Tarvok didn't need to look up. He knew who it was. Sarah Connors, the human warrior who had led the attack on his ship. The woman who had spoken to him not as a conqueror, but as something worse, something colder, something crueler. A predator. She stepped inside, her boots clicking against the smooth floor. The cell was dim, but even in the half-light, her expression was clear. A mixture of curiosity and something else. Amusement. She was enjoying this. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat across from him, casual, like this was just a friendly conversation. You look like you've got a lot on your mind. Tar-Vok didn't answer. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I've seen this before, you know. Your kind always looks the same when they realize what just happened. His eyes flickered up. My kind? The ones who think they're at the top of the food chain, she said smoothly. You all make the same mistake. You think because you've been dominant for a few centuries, that it means you always will be. Tar-Vok's jaw clenched. Sarah smirked. And then you meet us. Silence hung between them. She waited, watching him, studying him. Finally, Tar-Vok exhaled, his voice low. What now? Sarah's smirk widened. That depends on how useful you are. Tar-Vok narrowed his eyes. You plan to use me against my own people? Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small data chip, twirling it between her fingers. We already have everything we need, she said simply. Your fleet is ours. Your war plans, ours. Your command structures, supply routes, planetary defenses. She tapped the data chip against her knee. All ours. Tar-Vok's heart sank further. Sarah shrugged. But you could still be useful if you help us. Tar-Vok let out a deep, bitter laugh. Help you? He bared his teeth. You truly believe I would betray my own people? Sarah met his gaze, unfazed. I think, deep down, you already know what's coming next. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a whisper. The Kevlani Dominion is finished. Tar-Vok's claws tightened into fists. No, he growled. Even if you crush our fleet, the Dominion will rebuild. Others will rise. Our homeworld still stands. Sarah smiled. For now. The two words hit harder than a plasma blast. Tar-Vok's breathing hitched. Sarah's expression never changed. She let the words settle, let him fully grasp what they meant. Finally, she stood, tucking the data chip back into her pocket. You have a choice, Warlord. She turned toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. You can cling to your pride and watch your people burn. She looked back over her shoulder, her voice dropping to a whisper. Or you can help us, and maybe, just maybe, some of them will live. The door hissed shut behind her, leaving Tar-Vok alone in the dark. His breathing was slow, deep, because for the first time in his life, he was afraid, not for himself, but for his species. Because now he understood. The humans weren't just winning, they weren't just conquering, they were erasing him from history, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Tar-Vok sat alone in the cell, but the walls felt as if they were closing in. Sarah Connor's words echoed in his mind. The Kevlani Dominion is finished. Your people will burn. You can help us, or watch it all disappear. He had faced death countless times, on the battlefield, in the depths of space, in brutal ritual duels to prove his worth as a warlord. But this was worse than death. This was the slow, creeping realization that everything he had believed in was a lie. The Kevlani weren't superior. The Kevlani weren't invincible. They had never been the hunters. They had been prey all along, and humanity had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. Admiral Vasquez stood before a holographic display of the captured Kevlani fleet. Her officers gathered around her. The mood in the room was intense, because now came the hard part. The war was over, but what came next would determine the future of humanity itself. Commander Rourke folded his arms. We should destroy them, every last one of them. Send a message that no one messes with Earth. Some officers murmured in agreement, others hesitated. Vasquez exhaled. That's one option. She turned toward Dr. Hayes, who had been studying Kevlani biological data for weeks. "Thoughts?" Vasquez asked. Hayes adjusted his glasses. "The Kevlani are an empire built on conquest. If we just wipe them out, another species will rise to take their place. Maybe worse." "So what? We let them live?" Rourke scoffed. "After what they did to us?" Vasquez turned back to the hologram. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. And now she had to make the hardest decision of her life. "How do you break an empire permanently?" Her comms buzzed. Sarah Connor's voice came through. "Admiral, Tarvok is thinking. He's not talking yet, but he's close." Vasquez smirked. Good, because she wasn't done with him yet. The door hissed open again. Tarvok didn't look up this time. He knew who it was. Sarah stepped inside, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Tarvok remained silent. Sarah sighed. "Still playing the proud warrior? Even when you know you've already lost?" His mandibles twitched in irritation. "Say what you came to say, human." Sarah pulled up a chair, sitting across from him. "Here's the deal, warlord." She leaned forward, voice calm. "Your fleet is gone. Your empire is crippled. Right now, my admiral is deciding whether to wipe out every last one of your people, or let them exist under our control." Tarvok's eyes narrowed. "Control?" Sarah nodded. "A new order. One where your people no longer rule the stars. One where humanity calls the shots." Tarvok bared his teeth. "You think my kind will submit?" Sarah shrugged. "I think it doesn't matter what they want. They don't have a choice." Silence. Sarah studied him. Then she delivered the final blow. "Help us. Work with us. And maybe, just maybe, we'll let some of your kind live." Tarvok felt something deep inside him snap. They weren't just asking for surrender. They were demanding obedience. The Kevlani Dominion was dead, and he had to decide whether or not his people would die with it. Tarvok had never been a coward. He had fought wars, crushed rebellions, stood at the pinnacle of the Kevlani war machine. But as he sat in that cold, metallic cell, staring into Sarah Connor's ruthless eyes, he realized something terrifying. This wasn't a war anymore. This was the end of his species as he knew it. The Kevlani Dominion, once feared across the stars, was now nothing but a dying ember, its fate held in the hands of the very species they had tried to erase. And he? He was no longer a supreme warlord. He was a prisoner of history. He exhaled slowly, the words tasting like poison as they left his mouth. "What do you want?" Sarah's smirk was cold, victorious. She leaned back, arms crossed. Simple. Her voice was smooth, matter-of-fact, like a hunter explaining the rules to its prey. "You will deliver a message to your people. You will tell them the Dominion is over. You will tell them that from this day forward, humanity runs the show." Tarvok's claws tightened into fists. "And if I refuse?" Sarah's smirk widened. "Then we wipe you out, slowly, one planet at a time, until there is nothing left of your kind but dust and regret." Tarvok felt his breathing quicken, rage boiling beneath the surface. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't a choice. This was a sentence. The Kevlani had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, but now they would live on their knees, if they lived at all. And he? He would be remembered not as a warlord, but as the first Kevlani to bow. Slowly, painfully, Tarvok nodded. Sarah's smirk never faded. She tapped her comms. "Admiral Vasquez, our guest is ready to cooperate." A pause. Then Vasquez's voice came through, calm, assured. "Good, let's make history." The Kevlani surrender was broadcast across every known star system. Tarvok's voice, once filled with thunderous pride, now carried the weight of defeat as he uttered the words that would echo across the galaxy. The war is over. The Dominion is no more. Humanity is our new master. Across Kevlani worlds, warriors dropped their weapons, eyes filled with shock, rage, and horror. On Earth and its colonies, celebrations erupted. The war was over. Humanity had not just survived, they had dominated. And as the last remnants of the Kevlani fleet were integrated into human control, one truth became clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity had flipped the script. They had not been conquered. They had become the conquerors. And now, the galaxy belonged to them. It started with the message, a single broadcast that cut across every human communication channel, overriding military frequencies, hijacking satellites, and flashing across the skies in burning letters that defied explanation. War has a price, and it's your turn to pay. The words weren't spoken in some alien dialect. They weren't translated through artificial means. They arrived in perfect human English, burning with the weight of 1 billion voices, each carrying a whisper of rage. At first, people thought it was a hoax, a sick joke played by some rogue AI. Then, the ships came. They arrived without ceremony, blotting out the stars with their hulking shadows. Colossal behemoths that made Earth's greatest war machines look like mere playthings. The sky itself seemed to tremble under the weight of their presence. And then, the first shot was fired. New York fell in under an hour. London was wiped off the map before anyone could mount a response. The defenses of Beijing, Moscow, and Washington crumbled like wet paper under the sheer force of their weapons. This was no invasion. It was an execution. The ones who came had no interest in negotiations, no demands, no declarations of conquest, only death. For years, humanity had fought amongst itself, waging war over land, resources, ideologies. But now we weren't fighting for territory. We weren't fighting for control. We were fighting to exist. The first wave of Earth's defenders, our best soldiers, our most advanced fleets, were annihilated in days. It wasn't just superior technology. It was experience. We were children playing at war, and these things were something else entirely. They fought without mercy, without hesitation, with the precision of something that had done this 1,000 times before. And yet, despite the hopelessness, despite the overwhelming force brought down upon us, humanity did what it had always done best. We adapted. We learned. We survived. It started with small victories. A single downed warship near the ruins of Berlin, a successful ambush in the shattered remains of Tokyo. We scavenged their technology, we studied their tactics, and slowly, painfully, we fought back. The price was steep. Entire cities were sacrificed for a single enemy outpost. Millions died in battles that barely bought us a few more days of existence. But we kept going. Because we knew something they didn't. We understood war, not the clean, calculated conflicts they were used to, where the stronger force dictated the terms. No, humanity had perfected something else entirely. Guerrilla warfare, insurgency. We made Earth a hellscape for them. They took our skies? We turned the ground into a death trap. They controlled the cities? We collapsed them with bombs and turned the rubble into fortresses. They hunted us with precision? We struck from the shadows, using every dirty trick, every desperate strategy, every ounce of madness that had ever driven human history forward. For the first time, they hesitated. For the first time, they bled. And that was when the real war began. They retaliated with fire and fury, leveling what was left of Earth's civilization in their desperate attempt to crush us. But they had made a mistake. A mistake every conqueror in history had made when facing humanity. They underestimated the sheer, unrelenting spite of our species. We had nothing left to lose. No homes, no cities, no governments. The concept of nations no longer mattered. Borders were meaningless. We had become one people, united not by diplomacy or ideology, but by necessity, by vengeance. And when a species fights with nothing left to lose, it fights without limits. They called us vermin. We made them believe it. Our soldiers became ghosts, appearing from nowhere, striking hard, and vanishing before the dust settled. Our engineers turned the wreckage of their ships into weapons they had never seen before. Scientists worked without sleep, repurposing alien technology at a speed that should have been impossible. But the real terror? That was the civilians. The old, the weak, the unarmed. Those they thought were helpless. They were wrong. The elderly who once taught history now taught war. Grandmothers who had raised children became instructors in sabotage. The youth, the ones who had been forced to watch their homes burn, their families torn apart, they became something even we feared. They did not hesitate. They did not forgive. A child with nothing but a scavenged plasma rifle took down one of their generals in Argentina. A blind man, a former pianist, detonated himself inside a command post, taking 3 of their warlords with him. A woman who had never held a weapon before the war managed to single-handedly infiltrate their supply lines and poison their rations. They came expecting war. We gave them horror. And the more they pushed, the more they lost. Because no matter how much they slaughtered, we always came back. We always came back. They sent their best hunters, their deadliest assassins. We left their bodies hanging in the ruins of their own war machines. They deployed weapons meant to break our minds, to shatter our will. All it did was make us angrier. Because that was the secret they never understood. Humans don't break. We don't surrender. We don't stop. We had been at war with ourselves since the dawn of our existence. Every war in history, every moment of suffering, every nightmare we had endured had led to this, had shaped us into the perfect survivors. They had technology. They had numbers. We had rage. And rage won. The turning point wasn't a grand battle. It wasn't a singular act of defiance. It was something smaller, quieter. It happened in the wreckage of a nameless city, where the air still burned with the aftershocks of orbital bombardment. The enemy had moved in to clear out the survivors, their towering forms scanning the ruins, certain that nothing living remained. But something had survived. A squad of humans, no more than 7, hidden beneath the rubble, waiting. Starving, armed with nothing but makeshift weapons and a single stolen pulse rifle. Their leader, a woman whose name no one would ever remember, made the call. They struck like wolves. Knives plunged into exposed joints. Scavenged explosives detonated under armored feet. They fought without fear, without hesitation. They killed. And when the last enemy fell, gurgling in confusion, his blood soaking the dust-covered streets, something happened. One of them, a survivor barely past the age of 16, lifted the enemy's shattered helmet and let out a broken, half-mad laugh. "They bleed!" 2 words. That was all it took, because if they could bleed, they could die. The message spread like wildfire. Across the ruined world, the whispers took shape. They bleed. They can die. Humanity had been fighting to survive. But now? Now we fought to win. The war changed. The enemy felt it before they saw it. Before, they had been the hunters. Now they became the hunted. We weren't just fighting battles. We were making examples. We stopped hitting supply chains. We started targeting their leaders, their officers, their commanders. One by one, they vanished. Some were found strung up in the ruins of their own war machines, their bodies torn apart with human weapons. Others simply disappeared, dragged into the dark by hands they never saw coming. The fear started small, a hesitation in their movements, a tightening of their formations. Then the cracks deepened. They stopped patrolling alone. They flinched at shadows. Their transmissions carried undertones of something we had never heard from them before. Doubt. They had come to Earth to exterminate us, believing we were nothing more than another primitive species waiting to be wiped away. But we weren't. We were something else entirely. They had tried to teach us the price of war. Now, we were making them pay it. The first confirmed desertion happened in the ruins of what was once Paris. Their soldiers, once unshakable, once merciless, simply left. A full unit, abandoning their posts in the dead of night, their weapons discarded, their massive war machines left to rust. They fled into the darkness, hoping to escape something they could no longer understand. Fear. Not the kind of fear that came from facing a superior enemy. No, this was different. This was primal. They had watched their kind vanish without a trace. They had seen what happened to those who hesitated. They had witnessed our cruelty, because that was what scared them the most, how efficient we had become at this war. They had thought us savages, but the truth was far worse. We were learning. We had adapted to their technology, understood their tactics, anticipated their every move. And now we were perfecting it. The real shift in power came when we stole their ships. Not just the wreckage, not just scraps. We took fully operational vessels. Their own pilots, broken and afraid, gave them to us in exchange for mercy that we did not promise. And that was when we stopped being prey. No longer were we fighting in the ruins of our own world, scavenging to survive. Now, we took the fight to them. The first raid happened on a minor outpost orbiting Jupiter, a place we should have never been able to reach, a place they thought was safe. They never saw us coming. Using their own stolen technology, we tore through their defenses. Soldiers that had once bombed our cities now choked on our atmosphere as we vented their stations into the void. We did not conquer. We did not occupy. We erased. We left nothing behind but silence. The message was clear. We were done running. We were done hiding. They had come to destroy us. Now it was our turn. And for the first time, across their fractured communications, across their encrypted frequencies, we heard something we had never heard before. A plea. A single transmission, filled with desperation, with disbelief. They won't stop. They finally understood. This was no longer a war. This was vengeance. They tried to negotiate. It started as whispers across their comm channels, uncertainty, hesitation. Then, the first official transmission arrived. A desperate attempt at diplomacy. They offered peace. We didn't answer, because there was no peace left to give. They had come to cleanse us, to wipe our species from existence without a second thought. They had turned our cities to ash, slaughtered our families, and now they wanted to talk? We let them wait in silence. Days passed, then weeks. And while they sat in fear, hoping for an answer, we continued. Raids turned into full-blown assaults. Their outer colonies, worlds they had ruled for centuries, began to fall one by one. Not just to soldiers, but to the civilians they had once dismissed as weak. They had thought humans were fragile. They had believed our species was soft. But what they didn't understand was that humanity had never been defined by peace. We were built for war. The breaking point came in the skies above one of their core worlds. It was supposed to be an impenetrable stronghold, a planet encased in orbital defense grids, protected by a fleet that had never known defeat. We tore through them in a single night, not with overwhelming numbers, not with superior technology, with sheer, unrelenting madness. We crashed stolen ships into their stations, detonating reactors in suicide runs. We sent squads of soldiers onto their hulls, carving through their armor with makeshift weapons, tearing them apart piece by piece. And when the battle was over, when their once mighty fleet lay in burning ruin, we did something that shattered them completely. We broadcast a message, not in their language, not through translation, but in our own words, spoken in every human tongue, carried by every stolen frequency. A message of promise. War has a price, and now it's your turn to pay. That was when the surrender began. Not in formal declarations, not in official treaties. It started as desertion. Entire fleets abandoned their posts. Officers turned their weapons on their own commanders rather than face us, because they knew. They knew what was coming. They had made the mistake of believing this war would be swift, that humanity would crumble under the weight of their might. Instead, they had created something far worse. They had forged monsters. And now, there was no stopping us. The first true surrender wasn't an act of diplomacy. It wasn't a carefully worded agreement or a ceremonial laying down of arms. It was a massacre, not our massacre. Theirs. One of their own warlords, once a high commander in the initial assault on Earth, was hunted by his own kind. His forces had dwindled, his armies shattered, his ships lost to the void. He begged for reinforcements, for salvation. None came. His own people turned against him, hoping to buy favor, hoping to appease us. They dragged his broken body into the light, broadcasting their surrender to every known frequency. Their words shook with terror, their voices pleading. Take him. Take everything. Just let us live. We didn't answer. We didn't need to, because by then they already knew. Mercy was no longer on the table. The war wasn't ending. Not yet. Not until we decided it was over. Our forces, once scattered, once desperate, now surged like wildfire across the stars. The shattered remains of our world had become a forge, crafting warriors that knew no fear, no hesitation. And we did not just fight. We conquered. For every city they burned, we burned a world. For every family they tore apart, we erased a bloodline. They thought they had seen the worst of us. They were wrong, because humanity had long since abandoned the idea of simple survival. Now we wanted something else. We wanted revenge. The final battle came, not on some distant alien world, but in their home system. A place they had once considered untouchable. The beating heart of their empire, their last stronghold. They had fortified it, filled it with every remaining ship, every last soldier they could muster. It was a wall of steel, a final stand, an act of desperation. We didn't hesitate. We broke through their defenses in hours. We tore their fleets from the sky, ripped apart their stations, erased every last trace of their power. And when we reached the surface, it was not a battle, it was an execution. They fell before us, their weapons cast aside, their voices trembling. Some tried to fight, some tried to beg. It didn't matter. Because in that moment, as we stood victorious, as their empire crumbled into dust beneath our boots, there was only one thing left to say. The final words of humanity. Words that echoed across the ruined stars, across the silent remains of an empire that had once dared to challenge us. Words that would be remembered for generations, etched into history in fire and blood. War has a price, and we have made you pay. The silence was the strangest part. For years, the galaxy had been filled with the sounds of war, explosions ripping through the void, the screams of the dying echoing across comm channels, the relentless drumbeat of destruction. And now? Now there was nothing. Their empire, once a force that had ruled the stars for centuries, was gone. Their fleets were shattered, their worlds burned, their leaders dead. Humanity stood alone among the ruins. We had won. But victory didn't feel like we thought it would. The soldiers who had fought the hardest, who had burned the brightest with vengeance, now stood in the wreckage of a world that was no longer theirs to destroy. Some wept, some laughed, hollow and broken, and some just stared at the emptiness. For so long we had fought for survival. Then We had fought for revenge. But now? Now we had to decide what came next, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. We could have left, taken what we needed, resources, technology, knowledge, and disappeared into the black. Returned to Earth, to whatever was left of it, and tried to rebuild. But that wasn't who we were anymore, because Earth was gone. Not just physically, though its scars would never heal, but in spirit. The world we had been fighting for no longer existed. We had become something new, something more. And so, instead of leaving, we stayed. We looked at the shattered remains of their empire, the empty cities, the abandoned worlds, the broken remnants of a species that had once tried to exterminate us. And we made a decision. We took it, every planet, every station, every piece of infrastructure they had built over centuries. It was ours now, not out of mercy, not out of pity, but because that was the price of war. And we had every intention of making sure the galaxy never forgot. We did not rebuild their empire. We replaced it. Where their banners once hung, we raised our own. Where their laws had governed, we rewrote the rules in our image. Their cities, once filled with towering monuments to their own glory, were stripped down and remade to suit us. We did not ask for subjects. We did not offer peace. We made it clear, humanity ruled now, and if they wanted to survive, they would obey. The remnants of their species, those who had fled, those who had surrendered, those who had watched their civilization fall, had a choice: serve or vanish. Some tried to fight, clinging to the last shreds of their pride. Insurgents, rebels, dreamers who still believed they could undo what had been done. We put them down like dogs. We did not repeat their mistakes. When we wiped out their leadership, we didn't leave any seeds for resistance. We didn't allow figureheads to rise. We erased every trace of their old ways, their culture, their history, their symbols of power. Gone. They had tried to wipe us from existence. We simply finished the job. In reverse. The galaxy learned quickly. Other species had watched from the shadows as the war raged. Some had whispered of alliances, of helping us when the tide had been against us. But none had acted. None had risked themselves. And when we emerged victorious, when we took what we wanted, they crawled out of hiding like scavengers, hoping to negotiate. We did not negotiate. We made it clear. Humanity was no longer just another race among the stars. We were the rulers now. And there was no democracy, no councils, no debate. There was only us. 1,000 years from now, they will tell stories of how we rose. They will whisper our name with reverence and fear. Because war has a price, and we made everyone pay.